So my name is Antoinette Duffy, and LucidWorks has been so gracious to let me speak with you today. They may not let me speak next year after they hear me this year. So my background is more recently, I come from the data management side. Anybody heard of a company called Commvault? Hands up if you heard of Commvault. Fantastic. They're actually on the exhibit floor as well. So I spent 6 years of my career with Commvault traveling through the Americas and traveling through Europe. I'll be walking a lot, folks. And yeah, this is what I learned, in my experience is we can do a lot with data. And we always have been able to do a lot with data, whether we synthesize that data internally or whether we synthesize that data through a technology practice. And this kind of started, which is really going to put us in the right direction here. We'll get through some of these opening slides. Is, about 20 years ago, something was born, and it was called eDiscovery. Anybody know why eDiscovery was born about 20 years ago? It's a little thing called tobacco litigation, right? We all heard about that. Lots of litigation, lots of running around, grabbing documents. There were movies about it. I think John Grisham wrote a book about it, about the tobacco papers, and there was a lot going on. And at that point in time, in litigation, we were used to going through boxes of paper, putting Post-it notes on it, and sorting them out. When it came to doing litigation in the modern age, where we had digital evidence, it was a much different proposition. So we had to layer on some practices that made sense so that we could find success. We were in Greenfield. It was the Wild West. We were all cowboys. Some still are. So in that cowboy frame of mind, there's some real great, rich lessons learned from eDiscovery that are applicable to the practice of AI and trying to find some success. So why are projects failing? Here are some things we're going to talk about. I've got about 20 minutes to get through this. Interrupt me. If you have any questions, don't wait till the end. Let's be relevant and have dialogue and discussion, right? I am a bit of a talking head, but I like to engage as well. So why are projects failing? 77% of artificial intelligence projects fail. Comments, queries, challenges? Does that sound about right? Do you need a nap, sir? Anyhow, 77% of AJOC, they fail. Why? Anybody know? It's right there. It's right there. So the reason why they fail is, and we learned this in eDiscovery, if we didn't have a clearly defined reason to go through data, then we failed. What does that mean? Did we collect data from the right custodians? Do we understand the issues in litigation? Do we understand how to respond to them? Do we understand, do we have the right data? Do we understand the sources of data? Do we understand how to get that data, right? Internal stakeholders and processes, I'm going to say pro because I'm Canadian, not pro. Processes are not clear and they're not even defined. So when we started in eDiscovery, we had no idea what we were doing, none. So does that sound a little bit like AI? A little bit about the process, right? Data collections and models were challenging, and that is an understatement. Lack of expertise in-house. I think in AI, what challenges some of the technology teams is, we're going out to a new audience. How do you talk to an executive layer about technology in a way that makes sense to them, in a way that's relevant and impactful? So when you talk about lack of expertise in-house, it is a top-down effect on the artificial intelligence side of the house. Reach out to the executives. They don't understand AI. And what we found in the legal side of the house, I had a lot of challenge. When people are afraid of technology, you know what they do? They're going to shove our heads in the sand and we're going to ignore it. It'll go away. Oh, it's just a trend. It'll go away. And I dealt with that for about the first 5 years in eDiscovery. And it quickly became clear it wasn't going to go away. It wasn't something they could push to IT, and they had to get their hands dirty in it at an executive level. And that's why the education and training is so key to success. If the executives in your organization who have allocated budget for the AI projects and are just heavily invested in it as a line of business owner, if you don't have education and training, they don't understand the risks involved, and they're not on side, it's a much different discussion on failure, right? So it's really important that there's some steps taken internally, externally to educate the executive layer. Does that make sense? Any additions? Anything I've missed that you think should be added to that list? Okay. So have we seen this before? We have. I think I spoke a little bit about it, is that we failed a lot. There was no standards or practice. Everybody heard of Sedona? EDRM, Information Gov, all of these organizations? Well, these organizations were put together by the profession, judges, lawyers, technologists, and users. We all came together. I was part of that. We all came together and decided, let's make a decision about how we do this. Let's establish some practices. Let's establish some protocol so that we can understand how are we collecting this data so that when I'm challenged on the other side, I can prove my process. A little bit different than AI, but there's still a standard. Data classification, data cleansing, data integrity. Where's my data sources? How am I mapping that? So when it fails, and the LOB comes back and says, you know, I'm the data scientist or the data engineer, and they come back and they go, Antoinette, oh my God, well, why did this fail? If I don't have good process, and I haven't established who's going to do what, it's not my fault. And that's what happened in eDiscovery. Access to data was extremely difficult. So, and it's becoming more and more complex. So in the beginning of the session, I talked a little bit about that I came from, you know, data management and infrastructure. It plays incredibly heavy in this scenario. If I don't understand where my data is, the format that my data is in, where it's resting, how can I get it? Am I going to take a copy? Am I going to duplicate it? How is this going to impact everything else within my organization? We went in and we disrupted IT departments because back then, we didn't have the capabilities. We had to physically go on site, pull racks, pull servers from racks. I highlighted access to data was extremely difficult. Let me share a story with you. I had the pleasure of chasing data. Anybody heard of a company called Sherbrooke, or the hockey stick company, Sherwood? So that's in Quebec. So we had this, you heard about the automotive industry litigation? The government did the bailout for all the automotive companies, so I was involved in that. And we had to chase some data. And we had to chase it 4 hours east of Toronto. We had to chase it into a deserted warehouse that was filled with raccoons, mold, and water, had no power, had nothing. Because there was a real slimy person involved, and he decided that he would start hiding data. We found the server racks on a wooden pallet in the middle of a manufacturing floor. So you're not going to have that experience, but think about that virtually. You'll have the same experience. You'll have to go excavate. You'll have to go investigate. You have to go into that empty data warehouse with the water leaking and the rusty cables and pull that inaccessible data. Why? AI needs data. The more data we have, the better it is. So what's new is fashionable again. What's your data pipeline? Are we archiving? Are we doing data classification, data integrity? All this stuff and preparing your data for pipeline, as we did in eDiscovery, is what's going to help you get a better result. Training and education. So there's a lack of skill and expertise. We had that in eDiscovery. We didn't have a standard certification level for the technologists. We didn't have a standard certification level for anybody else practicing within the industry. So it's about acknowledging there's a skill gap within your organization and understanding what resource do I need to put in place. And of course, regulatory support. Any questions so far? So build a team, right? Invest for success. So there's 3 components for investing in success based on what we've done. So you have to have a good process. We need to build a team that's relevant and skilled and expert. Technology, we have to find the right technology. And the thing about AI that's so different from where I come from is and I believe you said it to me in your opening comments, was a plethora of use cases, right? And that's even more reason why you need to have good process within your organization. Because eDiscovery was kind of on the use case side. We knew what we were doing. It didn't change that much. But with you guys, every project's going to be a little bit different. So how do we develop a process that's going to work within your organization? So you heard Will talk about this yesterday, all about personalization. Build your personal path to success. Create internal stakeholder team. CAO, CDO, executives, line of business owner. Where are we on the maturity curve? People understand maturity curve of AI? Just some common terms, hub, spoke. Anybody know those terms? So how you build an internal team for artificial intelligence is you can build a central team that can service your whole organization. And then once you're starting to mature your model and you understand your process, you understand your data modeling, you understand your data extraction, you understand how you're going to visualize this data, all right? And once you're mature in that process and you have enough resources within your organization, then you have an ability to push those resources called a spoke configuration or a spoke model. You can push them out to the lines of business to be dedicated. So it really depends on where your maturity model is. So there's lots of options. And again, in eDiscovery, we're definitely in a crawl within the industry. On the team side, this is critical. Anybody working with a CDO, CAO, Chief Data Officer, Chief Analytics Officer? Yeah? Critical for the team, right? I mean, that's the person who heads it up. Lines of business, that's why you're doing the work. Right? We want to service in a line of business, whether it's our marketing or sales, engineering, taking a technology model in mind. On the executives, what is their go-to-market strategy? So when we look at artificial intelligence projects, another element to be successful with the CDO and CAO and the executive integration is about aligning those projects to what your go-to-market strategies are. So that makes a lot of sense for businesses who want to be profitable and stay focused and on target, which is why they're adopting AI, correct? Right? Makes sense. So data engineers and data scientists can be incredibly difficult to recruit. The resources are skimpy. How do you bring them in? So there's an opportunity to insource, outsource based on project, make small investments, right? Use the consumption business economy model. I'm going to consume a data scientist and engineer. Let me learn, right? There are hybrid models about adopting technology talent as well. Most importantly, I think this is key. She's not in the crowd today, but there was a big discussion from an FI who's attended. I'm not going to say who they are. And this is what they're really concerned about. They're way downstream. And they're so concerned about how are my end users going to visualize this data? What are they going to do with it? It could be assistive, pragmatic. So it's very key to then make sure that you have crafted the right UI, and they can be configurable, particularly with LucidWorks App Store. You can start building apps based on individual artificial intelligence projects. But I think it's really, really key that you have the right interface, because if I can't see it, I don't know it exists. And that's a real heartbreak to go through all that work, and then I can't see it. Technology, and again, another key point. What is your data fabric today? So let's say I'm an FI. You're going to have all of this. You're going to have, probably Gen 1, Gen 2 infrastructure. You're going to have tons of legacy applications, tons of legacy storage. You're going to have inaccessible data that may be applicable to your artificial intelligence project. How do you get a hold of that data? There may be cloud targets. Who knows? And in 5 years from now, frankly, does anybody really know where we're going to be 5 years from now? Because we didn't think we'd be here 6 months ago, right? So you don't know. So it's about having an open framework, having an open mind, and just being mindful that things change quickly. and to put that into your plan. Best of breed, am I going to do this on premise, or am I going to do this in the cloud? If anybody was able to hear the Exxon story yesterday, I thought they said something that was pretty critical. And what they decided to do was, after they did all this investment on their on-premise solution, they decided to virtualize it and put it into the cloud. Because the everyday IT scheduling was so disruptive to their AI process, they weren't successful. So they made a big decision to lift and shift to cloud. So it's a consideration, but have it in the beginning, right? Think about everything in the beginning. And what technology will meet the widest set of use cases, right? And I think that's the tricky bit. It's real tricky. We can't predict. Nobody's got a crystal ball. We don't know the use cases that are going to come up in the future. So, my personal feeling is there are some feature benefits that we in the business call table stakes. I don't know why I say that. I don't even like that term. But they're essential to success. And then there are some features that are kind of nice to have, but focus on basics in a technology platform that allows you some flexibility and freedom and potentially integration. And I'm sure you've heard API for days, and that'll really help, but make that assessment when you're selecting your platform. And again, I just mentioned the cloud about not being disruptive to IT. And the UI and the data interpreters is where the rubber hits the road. And these are the experts, and they're usually a combination of business analysts and technologists, and people who are specifically trained in user interfaces are so key to your success. Because if I can't show people, they're not gonna buy into it. Finally, so critical, end user impact study. If I build it, they will come. Is that what they say? But sometimes I build it and they don't come because they hate it. They're like, oh my God, what the heck is that? Were you like, was it midnight when you designed that? I have no idea what I'm doing. It's not even intuitive, right? And there's a couple of applications I've worked with that are like that on the eDiscovery side, and they were so clunky. They were so difficult. It was so hard to get your arms around it. It was so hard to get the technology working. And you're going to find those challenges in this space as well. So with this in mind, with this strategy in mind in building these pieces, is that you have an opportunity to define your success with a customized process, a customized team, and with technology that's going to work for you today and for tomorrow. But let's not be mistaken, this is tough, cerebral, right? Constant challenge. We're in a new frontier. We don't know where data's going. Sometimes we don't even know where data's been. But we don't ask questions on a Friday night about our data. We just let it go. So it's real tough when you have a lot of pressure and people want to see success. And it takes a lot of confidence to stand in this new industry and say, wait a second, we can do this, we can be successful. And we have all the tools available to us, and we have all the talent available to us. We just have to make the right choices at the right time for our individual organizations and projects. Anyways, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the 20 minutes, I appreciate it. Any questions, comments, queries, quarrels? Yes?
Okay, so you said something about building a team, a centralized team for data, right? What I've seen is that it's not that easy because you have sort of this, it's a self-governing network of people who have really access to data streams that they don't want everyone to have, right? So I think that's figuring out how to collaborate when you want to maybe boil your data down to give to somebody. And it's not that we're all different companies, we're within one company, but it's different departments kind of wanting their toys and not wanting to share type of thing, right? And then, so do Do you have any ideas about that?
No, absolutely. You know, the domain people in the organization. We get that a lot. Anybody heard of TD Bank in Toronto? Or, I mean, you have TD Bank right on the corner down the street. And that is the most awful organization for that alone, you know, the politics. So in TD Bank, there's one CIO that oversees 7 CIOs. And every line of business wants their own data. And the copying of data, and the amount of applications, it's not, you know, what we have is how much of it do we have. And they have absolutely everything known to man. So you're quite right on the political side. How do I convince the other stakeholders that I need access to their data? And that really comes back to step 1, defining your business, you know, the challenge and solution. So then you have something to go back to and say to them, this is benefiting you. And we'll police it, we'll protect it, we'll wrap the security around it, and it'll be safe. Does that make sense?
Pretty much empowering your CDO, Chief Data Officer, and building a governance and start from there.
Yeah.
You guys start setting up the rules, like who owns what, how people interact, and that's like one of the
Yeah.
things that I'm finding out with my client.
Yeah.
That's what we end up helping them out.
And the one thing we didn't talk about was the GRC element to this. I'd bore you to tears. We don't want to talk about that, but it's so critical. I mean, and that's the one thing, you know, when you come from a regulatory background and when you look at, you know, AI projects going forward is, and I think we were talking about anonymizing sensitive data, is we have to be really careful around the security. Where are we getting the data from? Are we infringing on privacy rights? All those things have to come into consideration. So again, make sure you've got that compliance officer on your team, right? Corporate, so you understand. Thank you again, everyone.